Who here loves caffeine? Okay. If you didn't say yes, you're a fucking drone. Okay, I don't know what you are, but everyone that I know, at least every once in a while, enjoys themselves a cup of coffee. Okay, now me being a extreme caffeine addict, okay, my drug of choice. I don't give a shit about nicotine. I don't care about weed. I don't care about alcohol. Like, not to say that I've never do those things, but I have never been particularly addicted to those things before. Now, what I am addicted to is some gamer subs. I mean, like, dude, $40 for 100 servings. That is such a great deal. That's $40 for a serving. Get me through the day. All right, get me through my morning. Get me through my knock shift. You know what I'm saying? But what is this shit doing to me? Now, I'm not only talking about all of the, like, additives, like sugar-free flavorings and shit like that, food colorings that are probably terrible for me that are in this, that I know are terrible for my, heart, liver, whatever. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about caffeine itself. Today, I want to learn about some caffeine. So I'm going to watch one of my favorite channels here, okay? It is Healthy Gamer GG by Dr. K. I want to watch this together, learn together.
And this is the problem.
Oh, a problem already. What do you know?
Is that it doesn't allow us to fall asleep, and we're tired because we didn't sleep enough. And then we are groggy. And when we are tired and groggy, what do we drink first thing in the morning? We drink caffeine.
Caffeine, bro. I'm always tired of groggy. That's not true. When I drink enough water, when I get enough exercise, I'm good.
What's the effect of caffeine on the brain in the long term? How safe is the consumption of caffeine to one's health? So this is a great question. We talk about alcohol. We talk about nowadays marijuana. And there are lots of people who are super, super pro marijuana. And people are also...
Like, I'm guessing that caffeine is probably like one of, if not the most studied drug there is at the moment that we use in like modern day, everyday life.
So exploring things like psychedelics. But there are some substances that have, generally speaking, been legal all over the world, have never been criminalized, have never been considered drugs of abuse, and are still very psychoactive. And caffeine is number one on the list. I think 90% of people in America, I think, use caffeine of some kind on a daily basis, 90% of adults. So it's staggeringly widespread. And a lot of people wonder, okay, what are the impacts of caffeine? Because we do develop a tolerance to it. Hey, y'all, I want to take a second to talk about...
Yeah, dude, I have a huge... there's been times where I have a huge tolerance. I've toned that down, just like control the amount of caffeine. Don't necessarily go for the caffeine like high all the time. But I've been pretty bad with caffeine in the past when I was like a teenager, staying up all night, every single night. Yeah, his coaching thing's great. We're gonna skip it, but yeah, I highly suggest checking it out. I have never personally done it myself, but it has a pretty good rap. So
the first is that the data on caffeine is mixed. There are a lot of studies that show that caffeine has health benefits, can do things like reduce the risk of dementia.
It's a double-edged sword, just like almost every single drug. There's usually multiple effects, and some can be positive and some can be negative. Caffeine definitely has more positive than negative effects, for me at least. I don't know how it is for everyone. Some people just there's that 1 in 10 guy that just hates caffeine, which is kind of crazy to me, but I mean, there's got to be something to that, genetically.
Increase all kinds of cardiovascular kind of outcomes. There's good evidence that shows that a moderate amount of caffeine on a daily basis is somewhat helpful.
Yeah, I would say I have an average of
longevity
200 milligrams. So let's see what he says about that.
But we also know that caffeine can be damaging for especially developing brains. And this is where I'd say if you're trying to figure out, okay, what should I do about my caffeine intake? Number one thing to understand is that the earlier you start using caffeine in brain development, the greater the chance is that you will have some kind of harmful effect. So our brain develops until we're about the age of 27.
I mean, that. I guess that's every single drug.
We started at the age of 16.
I don't know why I wouldn't think of that with caffeine. I probably started drinking caffeine when I was 14 years old.
But if you want to, if you're trying to figure out what is the healthiest way to use caffeine, I would
And if
say
I didn't,
start
I would
after
get, like,
the age of
dog
28.
sick.
Because what we know about caffeine is that it tends to protect against neurodegeneration that happens later in life. Okay. But what we know about caffeine is that when you take it very early, so for example, if we look at studies of prenatal caffeine exposure, so fetuses that are in the uterus,
Why did I
uteri
not
of pregnant
realize?
women who
I don't know how. Sometimes things are not connecting in my brain, bro. Like, obviously, it's gonna be bad when you're young. You're not supposed to drink caffeine when you're pregnant. I know that.
get
But like, I feel like it's so normalized these days for kids to like get a mocha or something like that. I've just never thought about kids. It's not only like, oh, kids are gonna be hyper if they drink caffeine. It's just like, no, caffeine is bad for kids. Don't be giving your kids caffeine, bro.
a
Don't be
large
giving them a
exposure to
fucking like a 12-pack of soda and let them run wild with it. You know what I mean?
caffeine have increased kind of efficacy of the frontal lobes. So these are babies that will sometimes have difficulty with self-regulation. So we know that caffeine and prenatal exposure sort of tampers with our frontal lobes. We also know that it tampers with our reward circuitry. So people, the most interesting thing is that early caffeine exposure, the most clear danger that we see to that, or excessive caffeine exposure during the developing brain, actually has to do with your weight, your sugar metabolism, and your binge eating behaviors. So we know that caffeine is an appetite suppressant. And so when you have an appetite suppressant in the brain, in a developing brain, like a fetus, or even a young child, it tampers with our sugar metabolism. So like when we start suppressing appetite, we feel less hungry. As we feel less hungry, we eat less food. As we eat less food, our energy balance starts to dip. As our energy balance dips, a compensatory action happens in the body. Our body is like, hey, we've run out of energy. We need to eat more calorie-dense foods. We need to eat foods that give us a lot of energy really quickly, because the caffeine has caused us to fall behind.
Sometimes I wonder if that's why I'm short of my brothers, dude. All my brothers be like 6'3", okay? I'm sitting here with the standard 5'10". How did that happen? How does everyone else in my family get the fucking giant genetics and I get the fucking norm? I chose the human race and they're up there with the night elves, okay? I've been saying, bro, they're putting something in the food. This new generation just be crazy tall.
On our caloric
They saw the birth rates go down and they started pumping the food with like growing chemicals, I swear.
intake for the day. So what we actually see is that the more caffeine that you ingest prenatally, the more likely your child is to develop obesity, the more likely your child is to have problems with their blood sugar. And what we see sort of cognitively is an increased susceptibility to cravings for food. So what's really interesting is that if you are trying to figure out, like if you're trying to think about, okay, what problems does caffeine cause? Most of the problems that we actually see have to do around diet and sugar. So paradoxically, one thing you can really think about is if you're having trouble eating a healthy diet and are vulnerable to highly processed foods with a very high nutrient density, there is a chance that cutting back on your caffeine will help you with that. On the flip side, we also know that for people who are intermittent fasting, for example, they will recommend caffeine intake early on in the morning or even into the afternoon to make it easier to tolerate that sort of fasting window, right? So if you're doing something like 18-6 and you're awake for like 8-10 hours a day without eating, caffeine can really be a useful appetite stimulant in that way. But I'd say that the primary problem that caffeine causes has to do with like making it difficult for us to regulate our blood sugar, our sense of hunger, and our cravings. The other big thing that we see with caffeine is that it interferes with sleep. So the second main problem with caffeine has nothing to do with necessarily brain development, but a lot of the problems that we see with caffeine have to do with the way that it interferes with sleep. And this isn't just falling asleep. This is also what it does to our sleep architecture while we sleep. So people who have higher levels of caffeine are more likely to have less restful sleep. We don't really have great data on what exactly it does or what the chances are, but this is just kind of my observation, is that even having caffeine first thing in the morning, for some people, will affect the restfulness of their sleep at night. So we can also get into this really interesting problem where caffeine keeps us kind of artificially awake, which means that our brain is fatigued from excessive use this kind of results in is a period of time usually between 2 and 4 hours between like 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Somewhere in there is usually what we're talking about. Maybe 10 o'clock, maybe 2 a.m., 3 a.m., somewhere in that 11 to 1 window is really where the major part of it is, where you're too tired to actually do anything productive. And since your brain is disinhibited and you've run out of willpower for the day, you end up doing stupid shit like being on your phone or whatever, or like playing video games or ordering things online or like buying stocks.
No.
Right? And this is kind of interesting. So there was a major trader that was just betting.
I should probably remain more consistent with my caffeine intake if I am going to intake caffeine. Working knock shifts, I will say, that makes it really hard. That's a whole different beast.
Against
That's a whole different
everyone
game.
who did stock trades like at 2 a.m. So a major trader realized that all these like retail traders, so people are downloading these apps like Robinhood, and they realized that people make stupid decisions like after midnight. So there's a major clearinghouse that was like any noob.
No, dude, that's when all the Redditors are on, okay?
Purchases anything after midnight. We're just going to take the opposite end of the bet. Whatever they want to buy, we're willing to sell it. And they made a ton of money because they were correct that people make stupid decisions when they're mentally fatigued. And this is the problem of caffeine, is that it doesn't allow us to fall asleep, but extends this window of kind of bad behavior. So then what happens is we wake up the next day and we're tired because we didn't sleep enough, because the caffeine was floating around in our brain. And then we are groggy. And when we are tired and groggy, what do we drink first thing in the morning? We drink caffeine. And so this is also important to understand. The way...
Yeah, but like, my question is, how long does caffeine take to wear off? Because if you're only drinking it in the morning and you let that remain your habit, does it still affect you when you get to the next, or when you fall asleep that night?
That caffeine boosts our energy is not by boosting our energy. The way that caffeine makes us feel more energized is by blocking...
I will say, you want to feel energized in the morning, bro, and if you have a shit diet, like, you want to feel energized in the morning, eat a fruit. Eat a whole fruit, like eat a apple. You will feel so much energy throughout that morning because your body is just like slowly digesting the sugars of that apple.
Adenosine receptors. So adenosine is the waste product from something called ATP, which is a general energy molecule in our body. It's like the most basic form of energy that we have. So really what you're doing is you're not actually improving your energy, you're just blocking the fatigue signal. So when you get dependent on caffeine, what happens is that you are functionally impaired because you're fatigued. You're like not at 100% by any means, but your brain tricks you into thinking you've got energy, which is how we enter the zombie state of like, I can't fall asleep and I don't really feel like doing it.
Like, here's one I want to look up, okay? All right. How long does caffeine stay in your system? All right. 5 to 10 hours, okay? With half-life of roughly 5 hours. This means if you consume 100 milligrams, 50 milligrams, after 5 hours... Wait, what? This means if you consume 100 milligrams, it remains after 5 hours, while peak effect occurs 30 to 60 minutes if you take... It can take up to 10 hours for caffeine to fully leave the bloodstream. So, effectively, if you drink your caffeine in the morning and you don't continue to drink it throughout your evening, you should hypothetically be fine by the night. I wonder if the studies actually reflect that,
but I don't actually have a functioning brain that is like able to enter the flow state. So these are the problems that I tend to see with caffeine. Number one is it messes with our sugar balance and our hunger and our cravings and our ability to binge eat and things like that. It really tampers with that.
I mean, like, appetite repressant might be good for some people, you know? I tend to overeat sometimes, right? I'm a little bit overweight. I've been kind of reining that in, especially lately, and I have had my up and downs throughout my adult life. But caffeine has been a tool, okay, for me to kind of suppress my appetite throughout my day, eat smaller portions, you know. I don't know how, but every time I'm on caffeine, I just can't eat as much food, which for me is a good thing, because my...
that we tend to see...
little fucking Zoomer brain wants to eat.
Is this weird stuff around falling asleep and not being able to fall asleep and like messing with our REM sleep so we're tired the next day. And then we also develop caffeine dependence. So in the absence of caffeine, we feel very groggy and tired. And so
Dude,
those are
yeah,
the
that's
problems.
just
Now,
so
like I said,
true.
there's a fair amount of evidence that shows that caffeine is also neuroprotective against dementia.
Especially if I'm going to work. If I'm going to work, like, I enjoy my job when I'm there, but if I go to work when I initially arrive and I don't have caffeine, I am so not in the mood for anything, dude. But once I actually get into my job, I always enjoy my job. It's just the idea of showing up when I could be going and doing something else, or when I was just doing something fun, and now I know I have to stop that and then go to work. Like, I would rather do anything else than show up to a job. But I have to, and I always put in my all, but
amounts, usually 1 cup
I
of
feel like
coffee
that's
a
everyone,
day or tea
you
or
know?
something like that is probably on balance healthy for you, is my guess. But we also have to remember that when you drink coffee or tea, or you are getting way more than caffeine. You're also getting antioxidants, you're getting all kinds of like bitter stuff, and you've got different stuff in like green tea that is helpful, like theophylline, I think, is in green tea as well.
It seems like green tea is
theophylline
probably the best form of caffeine. Like, getting your caffeine somewhat naturally. Probably drink green tea. I should probably drink more green tea, honestly.
Even a medication that
rather
we use
than,
for people who have asthma.
Gamer subs. I love gamer subs.
Airway.
This shit, I mean, bro, this should not be the everyday, Like, sometimes I'll go through, like, a phase of a week where it is my everyday. But I do drink, I make my own espresso in the mornings. Usually, I don't go out to coffee shops a lot. Because I don't know what the hell they're putting in that, but it tastes really good, and that can't be right,
So there are all kinds of interesting benefits around cardiovascular health, respiratory health, but you got to watch out. Friend of me is asking, is it caffeine or coffee that's protective? Can I take a caffeine pill and get the same benefits? Chances are coffee is far more protective than a caffeine pill. So there's also something else to understand about most psychoactive natural compounds. So if you look at the difference between a caffeine pill and something like coffee, coffee has antioxidants, may have other compounds that are stimulants. Like theophylline is a good example. I don't know if theophylline's in coffee, but it's definitely in green tea. So you'll have a variety of different psychoactive compounds in a natural plant-based form.
I guess that makes sense because, like, coffee, obviously, like, there's a certain craving that I have with coffee. Even if I'm drinking this, even if I go a week of drinking this, at the end of that week, I'm like, there's something about coffee that is so inherently addictive for me. I smell coffee. I just love the smell of coffee.
Interesting thing is that most plants that are psychoactive actually have compounds that do both. So in the case of, for example, marijuana, we know that there are compounds that can increase psychosis or even a sensation of anxiety. And there are compounds that can decrease psychosis and a sensation of anxiety. And in baseline marijuana, we have both. So what tends to happen when we create artificial marijuana, so we had a bad outbreak of this in Boston back in like 2010, 2012. I don't know if it's still a problem up there, but of something called
Okay, I don't know what
A2, which is artificial marijuana.
A2?
And boy, did people get fucking psychotic off of K2.
I was wondering if he was going to talk about that other drug. The one that, like, made someone eat someone's face or something. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but that is what I thought a lot of people were comparing to a synthetic marijuana. Salvia. I thought that was a synthetic drug, but on second thought, that might actually be a plant, and maybe K2 is that synthetic marijuana that I'm thinking of.
Every day I was in the emergency room, someone is like floridly psychotic. So one thing that tends to happen is anytime we purify something and remove it from its plant compound, we really escalate the biological effect, and frequently we'll tip it out of balance. Now we use this therapeutically when we're using drugs like aspirin and
Hey, if you know more about that, like, fucking zombie face-eating drug, let me know in the chat. Is it, like, what is it? What is K12? First thing, what is K12 pulled from? Is that actually pulled from marijuana? And is it that drug that I was thinking of?
Cholesterol medications and things like that. But generally speaking, when you remove caffeine out of something, I think it's going to be more likely to be harmful than balanced.
Many of us like to start the day with a cup of coffee and perhaps end the day with a glass of wine or some other kind of alcoholic drink. But it turns out that these two substances, alcohol and caffeine, can have surprising impacts on our sleep.
I mean, I know that alcohol makes my sleep shit. When I drink alcohol and then go to bed, there's no worse feeling in the morning. Like, I don't think I've ever particularly been hungover to the point where I'm like, I have such a bad thumping headache that I start throwing up. Because when I do drink, I don't eat like an absurd amount of shit food, and I always like consume a ton of water, and I end up going pee like 50 times that night. But I always feel okay in the morning, but I don't really feel like I slept 8 hours, even though I slept 12. I feel like I slept 5. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's weird.
Let's start with caffeine. Caffeine is in a class of drugs that we call the psychoactive stimulants. And everyone knows that caffeine can make them more alert, it can wake them up. But there are at least 2 additional hidden features of caffeine that some people may not be aware of. The first is the duration of action of caffeine. Caffeine for the average adult will have what we call a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. What that means is that after about 5 to 6 hours...
So caffeine's fine to drink in the morning, right?
50% of...
That's got to mean what he's saying, because if it's got a half-life of 5 hours and it takes 10, if you drink it in the morning, you should be fine when you go to sleep. So for
that
most
caffeine
people,
that you had is still circulating in your system.
Just drink it in the morning.
What that also means is that caffeine has a quarter life of about 10 to 12 hours. In other words, let's say that you have a cup of coffee at 2 p.m.
So you're saying after 12 hours, there's a quarter left.
Evening. It could be that almost a quarter of that caffeine is still swilling around in your brain at midnight. And as a result, it can make it harder for an individual to fall asleep or even stay asleep soundly throughout the night. So that's the first feature of caffeine. The second issue with caffeine is that it can change the quality of your sleep. Now, some people will tell me that I'm one of those individuals who can have an espresso with dinner and I fall asleep fine and I can stay asleep. But even if that's true, it turns out that caffeine can actually decrease the amount of deep non-rapid eye movement sleep that we have, stages 3 and 4 of non-REM sleep. That's that sort of restorative deep sleep. And as a consequence, you can wake up the next morning and you don't feel refreshed, you don't feel restored by your sleep. But you don't remember waking up, you don't remember struggling to fall asleep, so you don't make the connection. But nevertheless, you may then find yourself reaching for 2 cups of coffee in the morning to wake up rather than 1. So that's
dude, now I was going to do a segment on alcohol. Okay, so that might make me change my habits with caffeine, because I do drink it on my shift, and when I get home from my shift, typically I fall asleep. I work knocks, so I kind of switch it around pretty frequently, depending on if I have stuff to do in the morning or if I have stuff to do in the afternoon, which in itself probably isn't great, but this might make my sleep better, hopefully.
But now let's move on to alcohol,
with my sleep,
because alcohol is perhaps one of the most misunderstood sleep aids out there. In fact, it's anything but a sleep aid, and it can be problematic for you.
Alcohol, when I drink alcohol, I go to bed and I'm like, oh my God, this is the best sleep I'm gonna have in my life. And then I wake up and no, that shit was nothing.
Your sleep in at least 3 different ways. First, alcohol is in a class of drugs that we call the sedatives. But sedation is not sleep. And studies teach us that those 2 things are really quite different. Sedation is a case where we're simply switching off the firing of the brain cells, particularly in the cortex. And that's not natural sleep. In fact, during deep non-rapid eye movement sleep, for example, the brain has this remarkable coordination of hundreds of thousands of cells that all of a sudden fire together and then they all go silent. And then they all fire together and then they go silent. producing these big, powerful brainwaves of deep non-REM sleep. And so that's the first way in which alcohol can be problematic. We're mistaking sedation for deep sleep. The second problem with alcohol is that it can actually fragment your sleep. Alcohol can actually trigger and activate during sleep what we call the fight or flight branch of the nervous system, which will therefore wake you up more frequently throughout the night. And alcohol can even increase the amount of alerting chemicals that are released by the brain, once again fragmenting your sleep. The third and final issue with alcohol and sleep is that alcohol can actually block your rapid eye movement sleep or your dream sleep. And as we'll learn in subsequent episodes, REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep, dream sleep, provides a collection of benefits. Things such as your emotional and mental health, even creativity.
Whoa, so this is saying that different sections of sleep do different things for your brain?
Now, I'm not here to tell anyone how to live. I don't want to be puritanical. I'm just a scientist.
That is so
What I want to
interesting,
try
dude.
and do is provide you with the information about the relationship between caffeine and alcohol on your sleep. So then you can make...
This is Matt Walker, is his name. He's a sleep scientist. Specializes in sleep. I feel like this dude's name is Nigel. Dude, that totally does look like a Nigel. That's definitely not. It Matt Walker. Nah, that's Nigel, bro. But yeah. Anyways. Well, I'd say we got a good conclusion from this. I'm not gonna stop drinking caffeine, okay? I love caffeine way too much, but maybe I need to rein that in a little bit, you know, drink it a little bit less, drink it at more controlled times of the day. Probably not this every single day. The amount of bad shit that's in this, I mean, every once in a while it ain't gonna hurt, dude. Gamer subs, I don't know what they're doing. This shit is so good. This is some witchcraft right here. This is so good and sugar-free. They've been getting the sugar-free stuff down lately, but Gamer Subs is on a whole nother level, so shout out to them. Well, anyways, that was the video. I will catch you guys. Have a good one. I'll try to upload more often. Later.